welcome again to bne's weekly video blog with me, Ben Harris, Editor-in-Chief of bne, and Editor-at-Large, Liam Halligan.
Ben?
Liam, how are you doing?
Very well, Ben. Nice to see you via Skype.
What I want to talk about, what's on the agenda this year, we were talking a little bit about what's going on in Armenia, Electric Yerevan, but first I thought we'd cover what our new latest issues just come out. BNE.
Sure, I see on the front cover of the latest BNE, Ben, there's a cover story by you on the rotten state of Russia's banks. Russia's banks, of course, dominated by state-run companies at the top end. What drove you to write this story?
Well, the first quarter results have just come out, and of course, in the function of the crisis, Russian banks are in the front line of the sanctions because they've been cut off from the international capital markets, and they've been using those heavily to finance themselves. Money in Russia is very expensive, and it's usually short-term, but the big banks and state-owned banks, 5 out of the top 6, have been able to tap billions and billions of dollars internationally, which is also A, very cheap, and B, extremely long-term money. So the Russian banking system is now under a great deal of pressure. And it's being funded by the central bank, and happily Russia has enough in reserve, so that's actually not a problem. There is enough money to fund the banks. The sector is still liquid. But they're doing this directed lending. They're helping state-owned companies out. So if you look at the balance sheet, it doesn't look that bad. But once you start drilling into the details, you can see things like provisions in Russian Agricultural Bank on loans it's made to farms are now up to 75% of its loan book. Whereas, the non-performing loans, the NPLs, are a much smaller number. The sector average is something on the order of between 5 and 6, which is not a problem. But it's to say that the Russian banking system is in trouble, and while the CBR has enough money to bail them out for the time being, this can't last forever. So if you wanted to have a financial crisis, this hiding assets, hiding bad loans in your book by declaring them Tier 3, which is what the piece talks about, is going to end in disaster eventually. Not this year, maybe not even next year, but eventually.
It's a pretty strong cover, Ben. We've got an apple representing the Russian banks with a little worm with a banker's tie and spectacles on it. Are you saying that Russia's banks they pose a systemic danger?
Not at this point, but it is concerning to see, the way they have their assets, they declare them and they have to provide for them. They split them into 3 tiers. Tier 1 is things like gold, which are liquid, you can get rid of very easily, and value easily. And Tier 3 are things like artworks or buildings, which you can only sell when the market is ready to buy them. And a lot of those things have no value at the moment. But the rules are you can actually write down any value that you want, what you think the market value is. And they've done a lot of that. They've been marking these things down, but if they actually were forced to sell them, they wouldn't be able to. So a big chunk of the Russian bank's assets is actually useless, it's worthless. And so if there's another shock, then the system is vulnerable to collapse. It's not going to happen now, and as I said, there's enough in reserve to actually bail the banks out again. But it is very concerning, and it's a fundamental problem with the way the economy is being organized, with the state banks taking the lead. You need to encourage more competition. But then again, with the economy contraction, the private banks, the commercial banks, they're having an even harder time because they don't have access to the state money like the state banks do. So they're becoming leaner. So we're setting ourselves up for a problem further down the road. And this was to put the hand up and say, look, here it is, something needs to be done about it.
Okay, very good. I know you've been on our website lately, we've been writing lots about the electricity Yerevan story. And you've been discussing this with Monica, our correspondent down in Armenia.
Yeah, no, Monica Elena, she turned up early on Monday morning. Of course, been covering the story closely from the beginning. And I got a brain dump at what our new feature, BNE Rapid Reaction, or hashtag BNE Rapid Reaction. You can see the interview on our website, on the homepage, and on the video box. But really, the main takeaway was you had thousands and thousands of people on the main street, the highway in the central Yerevan, protesting. There were more than 250 arrests, there were riot police, there were water cannons, tensions are very high.
Wow.
But the first thing to say is that this is not a new Maidan. This is political, but in the sense that the people were complaining about a 16% hike in electricity tariffs. And to you and I, that may not seem to be a big deal, but in all of the countries of the region, hiking power tariffs at costs that people can't escape, they have to pay.
Yeah.
When they're so poor, this is a big
chunk of their income.
It's a big hit in their income.
Yeah.
And actually, we're working on a cover story to extend this idea to look around the region, because there have been similar riots already in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Ukraine. A key demand of the IMF was a doubling or trebling of domestic power tariffs. And again, it's not being reported, but there's now a permanent demonstration in front of the Rada in Kiev calling for the reduction of this, because people can't afford it. And even in Russia, they just put the tariffs up and people are unhappy about it. So this is something to watch, these tariff hikes, and where the retail price is as an indicator of possible political problems or instability.
What are the implications of the Yerevan story?
I think it's part of the convergence process, in so much as Russia's already brought its retail power, oil prices, petrol prices, power prices, up to the level of the rest of Europe. And all the countries eventually have to do that, because what you're talking about here is a government subsidy. And a lot of these countries, like Yerevan, Armenia, have to import the fuel from elsewhere. And of course, this has been the key issue in Ukraine, where they're paying international rates for gas and yet charging the people a quarter of what it costs. However, in the transition process, people remain very poor. And so they don't. The government's it's political suicide to raise these tariffs, or at least it causes political problems. And what happened in Yerevan in the last few days, and is continuing to happen, is exactly what governments are so scared of: is that if they hike the tariffs on the regular people, stop subsidizing them, then you're going to lead to unrest of some sort.
For my part, Ben, here in London, we just had an event. The latest BNE event last week at Cass Business School, Russia, Which Way Now? You were on the panel, of course, along with myself, Valery Morozov, a former Kremlin advisor, Tom Blackwell from EM Communications kindly sponsored.
And it's the video that's just been released on the site as well.
The video that's just been released on the site. Renee Friedman, also a well-known emerging market analyst, was on that panel. We're very grateful to Cass for hosting our events. For my part, in the latest mag, My Invisible Hand column deals again with a story I've been writing about a great deal. Of course, what's going on in Greece, because while we look at the implications of Grexit for the rest of the Eurozone, that's mainly what the Western media focuses on, and stock markets in the States and so on. Of course, there are countries that are much closer, countries in the BNE region, countries in Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe.
We were just writing this week, for me, Ukraine's got all its default ducks in a row, and I don't see them doing a deal. There's now going to be an emergency meeting between the Minister of Finance, Juresko, and the Credit Committee sometime this week coming, where there's a last chance to do a deal. But tell me, Graham, if Greece does default, which is going to be a big deal, is there going to be contagion? Is this going to hit the BNE region at all?
Well, I think there will be contagion. You know, the Greek economy is only 2% of Eurozone GDP, as the Eurocrats in Brussels like to tell us, the sense being that, it's a small economy and we can all handle Grexit. But a bath plug's only 2% of the surface area of a bath. And once Greece Grexits, there will be, if that happens, many other countries will at least think about it, and politicians in other peripheral Eurozone countries will think about it, especially if Greece then eventually recovers with a competitive devaluation. If you look at the NPLs across the Eurozone banking sector, they're much higher in total than they were in 2008, 2009, not least in Greece itself, but also in France and in Italy. So I don't buy this line, Ben, that's constantly peddled that the Eurozone banking sector is now far more resilient. I think that's just a bargaining line in order to try and throw that back at Tsipras and Yanis Varoufakis to say, we're ready for any kind of Grexit that you want to. If you want to be kamikaze guys, we can handle any explosion because our banking sector.
Could there be some sort of domino effect? I mean, we've just been talking about how at the core of Russian banks they're rotten, and you're kind of suggesting that in Europe the problem with rotten banks is actually the same, and that it's going to be a Lehman moment but on an EU level, a country going down instead of a bank.
I think that's.
a chain reaction.
We've had an IMF default, and then there's a bureaucratic process following an IMF default.
They automatically get a month, don't they?
Yeah, so as we said in bne months ago. The really big moment is if and when the ECB pulls the plug, rips off the oxygen mask of credit to the Eurozone banking sector. That's July the 20th. That's when Greece's $3.5 billion loan from the ECB must be paid back. If that's not paid back, it becomes very, very difficult for the ECB to continue to offer that credit line, the credit line that's effectively keeping the Greek banking sector afloat to the extent it is still afloat. It's absolutely on the waterline, with one nostril above the waterline, of course. What I've written about in Invisible Hand is actually slightly different. There was a very interesting report by UBS, and you can get to the report by clicking on the link in the article up on the site, the Invisible Hand article, focusing on the impact of countries like Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, core bne countries of any possible Grexit. And the report says it's very detailed. The basic headline is that the currencies of these countries will suffer significantly from any kind of rush to the dollar, and these countries will suffer not just because they are emerging market currencies that will get caught in the rush as there's a flight to quality, if you like, but also because of their close trade links with their geographic proximity to Greece. So as we've said in bne for a long time, Ben, in 2010, 2011, when the Eurozone crisis really reared its ugly head, that threw the bne region into recession, and that could well happen this time too if we do see a spike in bond yields, even if Grexit's avoided. And given how hard this negotiation process is going, how to the wire and beyond it's bound to go, we are likely to see spiking bond yields. They're part of the negotiating process. There are going to be economic ramifications for countries in Eastern Europe.
So Grexit means, bottom line, Grexit means definitely more economic slowdown, spilling over into our patch. So all of the Central European countries in particular will slow down. And possibly contagion, financial crisis that would spread across the whole continent.
I think that's unavoidable, and I think mainstream Western media sources are downplaying all that because they don't want to hand Syriza the bargaining power that stems from acknowledging the damaging economic impact of Greece not playing ball.
Well, it seems to me that if one investment bank in New York can go bust, and then trigger a huge international crisis in 2008, an entire country effectively going bust. Surely that's going to be much worse.
It remains to be seen, but I certainly do not buy the line, and I know very few people in capital markets who do, that Grexit can be a smooth process that will have no contagion effects whatsoever. But hey, the referendum's on Sunday. We can get together next week, Ben, and talk about the result.
Okay. Well, thanks, Im. That's all we have time for. Thanks again for watching us. You can find these videos on our site and lots of others that we've done, including the electric Yerevan thing and our latest panel. Check it out. Thanks again.